Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting for August. Fire alarm procedures are as follows. If the fire alarm is activated, please vacate the offices down the main staircase opposite the lifts in the foyer. Assemble in Hawley Square on the green. Officers will assist you and advise you when it's deemed safe to return to the chamber. Would everyone present please ensure their mobile phones are turned to silent and they are not used to make or receive phone calls while this meeting is in progress. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed for members of the public. The meeting will also be recorded and subsequently broadcast on the internet. Does anyone intend to film the meeting? That's a big no. Okay, move on. I've had no requests to speak under 20.1 and we have no members of the public. So we move on to item 1, which is the apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillor Faruqi and she is replaced tonight by Councillor Harry Scobie. Any other apologies? That's a no. Excellent. Item number 2, the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Nope. Okay, and item number 3, the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of July 25. To approve the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel meeting held on the 15th of July 2025, a copy is attached to the agenda pack. Everybody has read them, I presume, and can have a proposer. Councillor Davis and a seconder, Councillor Green. Do all members agree? Excellent, thank you. Move to item 4, the review of the Overview and Scrutiny Panel work programme for 25-26. I'm going to come to David first about your working group, asking how that's getting on.
Yeah, the first survey is, has been drafted and it's now awaiting approval through the TDC system, ready to go out to staff. And we've got a meeting later this week to get things moving.
Excellent, thanks David. Okay, is there anything else members would like to discuss? Councillor Austin?
I wonder, Chair, if at some point in our programme we could have a quick look back at the recommendations made by and accepted by Cabinet by the various working parties that we've had and see what's actually happened with those, follow them up, because I know there was one that you chaired yourself that sort of got lost in a transition to the current administration, and there's others since that we could perhaps do with just checking where we're at with the actions that were agreed by Cabinet on those. Would that be a possibility, please?
It's certainly a possibility and something we have discussed before. I don't know whether it's... Can we set up a little working group to do that? Or maybe
No, we can just write a report.
You can write a report.
We can write a report.
Officers will write a report.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go. Officers will write a report on those previous scrutiny reviews. There you go. Also, I wanted to ask, going forward, about Cabinet member presentations. We're having one on the budget tonight. We were going to have Councillor Yates, but that's not necessary now because we're talking about the budget tonight. I think we were going to have Councillor Duckworth in at some point to talk about regeneration. I don't know if that's still what we want to do, and we need some others in the pipeline really, so we can give them some due notice. Councillor Scobie.
Is Councillor Yates down for September? Is that still happening?
No, it won't be happening. There won't be a necessary because we can talk about the budget tonight with. Unless, I think that's what we agreed. I don't see any point in him coming. We're going to cover the ground tonight. We'll just be covering the same ground again. If you've got any questions, we can go straight to Matthew. You're looking perplexed. You're okay with that? Okay, so and also we normally have our operational services Cabinet member at some point later in the year, don't we, to normally talk about how things have gone over the summer. So I think we're penciling Councillor Alban maybe for October. Yeah, so Councillor Duckworth in September, talk about outstanding regeneration projects, and Councillor Alban in October. And is that okay with everyone? Yep, you okay for October? Thank you. Perfect. Anything else? We're all okay. Cool. Okay, moving on to item number 5, the provisional outturn 24-25. I call on Matt Sullivan to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. This report presents the provisional outturn for 24-25 financial year. It offers a view of our financial performance against the General Fund revenue and capital budgets, as well as the housing revenue account. As you will see within the report, we've identified significant overspends that occurred in 24-25. In the General Fund, 2/3 of our revenue overspend, specifically 3.1 million, was driven by pressures in temporary accommodation for homelessness and housing benefit. The demand-led nature of these services makes rapid control and reduction particularly challenging. a sentiment echoed by many councils nationwide. Our figures show a 31% increase in homelessness relief approaches during the fiscal year, underscoring the scale of this challenge. Additionally, service areas such as maritime and cleansing services have also contributed towards these overspends. We have had numerous meetings this year to discuss these issues, and report will be ready this year to look into sustainable options for our maritime services and ways to reduce spend on cleansing services. As a result, the main headlines of this report are that the General Fund was overspent by 4.6 million, largely driven by, as I said, temporary accommodation and homelessness and housing benefit. The temporary accommodation 2.2 million and housing benefit 900,000. Significant overspends by directorate were included in the detail of the report, include place, as identified previously, environment 2.9 million, which is mainly domestic waste, street cleansing due to staffing, and maritime and technical services due to income shortfalls and write-offs. Corporate services 531,000, including housing benefit overspend, which was 794, so it's clearly offset by other savings. Chief executive areas, which is due to enhanced security measures following the cyber incident, so it's mostly IT costs. Funding up the overspends, the net overspend of 4.6 million is proposed to be covered by drawing down from various reserves, including the Equalisation Reserve, Risk Management Reserve and others. The General Fund Capital Programme, an underspend of 57 million against a revised budget of 72.2 million, primarily due to delays with Pathfinder Programme, Vehicle and Equipment Replacement Programme and the Housing Assistance Policy. This report also covers some proposed changes to the 25-26 Capital Programme as outlined, including budget transfers and increases. The housing revenue account shows a provisional deficit of 345,000 that was recorded, exceeding the budgeted deficit of 113k, i.e. a variance of 232,000. Key variances included a deficit in dwelling rents, but an increase from leaseholder recoveries and rechargeable repairs, and repairs and maintenance saw an overspend of 500,000. The HRA capital programme saw a significant underspend of 27 million, which was 52%, mainly due to council dwelling major works and disabled adaptations and council dwelling purchases replenishment schemes, largely due to delays in tower block works and acquisitions. The report recommends that Overview and Scrutiny panel comment on the draft 24-25 outturn position for both the General Fund and Housing Revenue account, including their capital programmes. It is worth noting that additional management actions are underway to strengthen budget monitoring and address pressures proactively for 25-26. I'll take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, members, questions for Matt? Councillor Scobie.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, not the first time we've seen these figures, because I think they went to Cabinet last month, but our first opportunity really to comment on them. We're talking about a 20% increase in the budget from when we started the financial year in April to when these figures were first done in July. So I've got some questions just around how we got to that point. So clearly there's some high volatility budgets, some of the ones that you covered, Matt. How did we arrive at the figures that we included in the initial budget forecast? And what have we learnt from how we came to those figures this time for when we put together budgets in the future? Because clearly something went wrong to get that far off, and clearly there's some outside influences on this, but from our side we've massively sort of underappreciated some of the costs coming.
So I assume primarily, obviously, the major element of the overspend in the first instance is the 3.1 million that we're talking about in relation to homelessness and housing benefit, both of which are incredibly volatile and also we have little or no control over. So at the point where we set the budget, we had agreed in principle multiple measures for delivering reductions in the cost of homelessness. Effectively, as fast as we were bringing schemes online, or we had agreed schemes, the increase in volume in terms of the number of people presented effectively wiped out any potential efficiencies that we'd assumed through the budget. There wasn't anything we could do to control that specifically. There are separate pieces of work that have been undertaken around that. So even as part of the budget proposal, this year's position is better than last year's position, primarily due to the work that's been undertaken by the housing team, but also we recognised the pressure as part of the 25-26 budget, and we built in what was effectively an extra 750,000 to offset that pressure. So there were previous assumptions around savings, those were removed, which was £250,000, but over and above that we built in an additional £500,000 towards managing those costs, knowing that within the programme, in terms of capital programme and stuff, we also had acquisitions and developments that would be coming online, which would further reduce the impact of homelessness moving forward. we're not unique. Every single authority had an overspend, if you like, in relation to homelessness. One of the things that Chris says on a regular basis is that that is our equivalent of adult social care in terms of the volatility and the impact that it's having, and the fact that we have no choice but to deliver it as and when it arises. Again, with regards to housing benefit, we're looking at that. So as part of the report, we specifically moved the element that was associated with homelessness, the additional deficit for housing benefit in terms of under recoveries, over to homelessness, so that we're in a better position in terms of pushing local the government with regards to funding around those schemes. They are giving greater flexibility around the proposed settlements moving forward. It doesn't mean we've got more money available, it just means we've got more flexibility in the funding that is available. So we kind of wait and see until we actually get the final numbers in relation to that. But housing benefit in totality, again, as part of the budget assumptions for the MTFS, we've effectively built in 300,000 towards reducing that for 25-26. And further increases over 26, 27, 27, 28 to actually remove that variance moving forward. It's already this year we're seeing from a reporting perspective, when you see the monitoring report, which will be published shortly, there's reductions in those numbers as well. So you're seeing a smaller number in comparison to what you've seen previously. There is, and will continue to still be, a pressure around those. We don't have the capacity to just build in what would have effectively been 2 million in the 25-26, so we've got a phased approach to it. So that's all ongoing. So in terms of what we're doing about it, that's where we are. Additional budget monitoring meetings have been set up to deal with the issues. So, in terms of volatility in totality, there's obviously additional costs in there around cleansing and maritime. They're big numbers as well. We're having separate monthly monitoring meetings over and above the original meetings as effectively as a collective to look at those, look at what measures can be put in place to reduce the impact of that in this year. But also there was growth factored into the budget as part of the MTFS. So there are plans and there are works underway to be able to manage those down over the course of the year. Obviously we can't, it is not sustainable, which is one of the things that Chris had identified as part of the report previously. It's not sustainable to draw down from reserves at that level. We can't continue to do so. So we are looking at what opportunities there are to bring 25-26 in on budget, but at the moment there is a deficit again, and primarily that is the same areas. There's some of them have come down, but work is underway in relation to cleansing, work is underway in relation to maritime, work is continuing around homelessness, and a proposal was actually approved to bring in additional resources to deal with the front end stuff to try and reduce the impact of homelessness moving forward, because we've seen quite major benefits from that in the past. But I think if Bob or Ash wanted to talk to that they can in more detail, but that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, thank you. And my questions, obviously there's an element of each of those individuals. I'm looking more overall from a financial budgeting perspective, and it just feels like maybe we went into this year either a bit too optimistic in terms of what savings could have been brought out of that, or maybe not, like many other councils, you say, not forecasting what some of those risks could have impacted us. And I just want to make sure we're not going to make the same mistake again, because as you said, sort of the impact on the reserves is huge for 1 year. So you do that again for another year and suddenly we're in very, very difficult position. So how does this change that sort of medium term sort of picture? Because we've agreed a number of documents, we've got our corporate strategy, we've got our plans as a council of things we want to do, and suddenly in a second our reserves have, I can't remember what the figure is, about a quarter is gone, is it? Or
31%.
31%, so nearly a third of our reserves has gone, which changes our entire risk position, because it means that if something else goes wrong, or we have another shock to the council, suddenly those big pots of money, in theory they're going to be there to actually spend on cash flow on a day-to-day basis, but actually being able to use them is a different question. So how does this, in the view of the financial team, change that medium-term picture?
So we're working, from a budget planning perspective, all the meetings have already been put in diaries with regards to Star Chamber process and what that will look like moving forward. The expectation is that people will be coming forward with proposals not only during the course of the year to manage down the impact, like I said, so there's additional meetings. So we have monthly monitoring meetings as standard, so the finance team go out and support individual managers with regards to their monitoring. That all feeds up into the head of service. What is happening now is there will then be a separate meeting between the head of service, the appropriate director, the 151 and the chief executive, effectively, myself, to have a conversation about what does that look like? Is it realistic? Can it be managed down? What is it that we would have to stop doing, if you like, in order to be able to bring it in on budget? So those conversations are taking place now on a monthly basis, and they're all booked in. Some of those meetings, all of those meetings in relation to the first phase have taken place. That's part one, is to look at that in the context of budget monitoring, but part two is to look at it in the context of medium-term financial planning. Obviously, from a longevity perspective, we're looking at realistically setting a budget for 26, 27 and 27, 28, because obviously local government reorganisation is going to be impacted on a longer term. The government have obviously turned around and said that they will give us a 3-year settlement, which puts us in a much better position in terms of understanding where we are moving forward. Early indications are that our position, due to various different factors, will be better than we originally anticipated from an MTFS perspective, mostly to do with the calculations and deprivation and everything else. That's not to say that we have gone from a position where we needed to identify efficiencies to a position where we're awash with cash, because we're not. But we are significantly better off than a lot of the other Kent authorities in other local, other areas of the district in totality. There is a much more improved position forecast, I will caveat it, because obviously until we actually get the settlement and the numbers that are contained within it, but there's been a significant amount of modelling that's been undertaken at the moment. We do have an improved position, which gives us a few more options, but there's lots of conversations going on in terms of your concerns and how that will feed into the MTFS.
Apologies, I don't want to take over this, but I just wanted to ask one more question, which is, so this budget was agreed in February, came in 1st of April. Was last month the first time that the potential, 20% increase in our costs, or over budget costs, is that the first time that that was officially reported, was when it went to Cabinet last month? Or has this been picked up in a earlier monitoring report? I'm just trying to understand where control was lost on this and where the gap was, because obviously we as councillors sat and set a budget in February, and then the first sort of we hear about it is, that first sort of monitoring report and flagging up. Just wondered where this had been flagged up first, and why we're sort of talking about it now and not 3 months ago.
So I think we're talking at cross purposes a little bit. This is the out-term report for 24-25. You're right, from a budget setting perspective, it would have still been approved in February. We took quarterly monitoring all through the year. So information was presented to Cabinet in relation to the projected out-term position. As identified within this report, there was a significant movement in when from out-term from when the last report was presented. There was a report presented in January, but that report was based on November data. So there was a significant movement. By the time you get to the out-term report, there was a significant movement, and that's because, from a forecasting perspective, there were unknowns that materialised. For example, the write-off of the works associated with the flapgate. There was an expectation that there was a potential for recovery through that, through insurance purposes. There was then a decision taken that it was not going to be recoverable, or the chances of recovery were relatively low, and as a result of that, if we pursued it from a legal perspective, the costs were likely to be greater than the benefit, if you like. So the decision was taken from a purely accounting perspective that we knew enough at that particular moment in time to write it off. So that was a 479,000 hit that the accounts took, that even the head of service wouldn't have known about up until the point where we actually made the decision. So effectively, there were a few things like that happened over the course of the year. But like even with homelessness, you project in even so you have April, May, June, a first monitor then goes in August, and you're projecting through for the rest of the year based on what is an incredibly volatile budget. The numbers didn't diminish to the level. In fact, they increased over the course of the year, which obviously further impacted. So all the best will in the world, HB and homelessness are practically impossible to project through to the end of the year, which is why historically we've specifically had reserves around, so the equalisation reserve is specifically there to deal with those type of volatilities. That's why we had the reserve in the first place. But obviously having all the other overspends that materialised during the course of the year over and above that have further impacted on reserves way above what we anticipated.
Councillor Curry.
Thank you, Chair. The 1 million overspend for sickness and absence levels within street cleaning are a concern. Have officers sort of pinpointed any particular reasons for this, and how can this situation be improved?
So although Matt is here and can talk on this, the meetings that we were talking about, the meetings that I've just referred to in terms of additional meetings, to review from a monitoring perspective where we are and where we're going, include that specific issue in terms of where we are in terms of sickness. Work's been undertaken to compare us as a... The difference between us and a lot of other authorities is they have an external service. They buy that service in, which means they're on private sector terms and conditions rather than local authority terms and conditions. So even if you looked at Canterbury, for example, who have a LATCO, the LATCO was created from an external organisation on their terms and conditions, so they're not on local authority terms and conditions. So that generally has an impact on the level of sickness. In terms of ageing workforce and all the other pieces that go with it, in terms of musculoskeletal issues and so on and so forth, it's one of those environments where they're out in all weathers and everything else, they're more prone to sickness. So we would anticipate, always would anticipate, that even if we have a council average for office workers, that area will always be higher. What the aspiration now is to get that between what the private sector would do and what other local authorities do and where we are, so that we can manage that down, because we know that there are significant efficiencies to be had in relation to overtime, agency and so on and so forth. It's also worth saying it's not just to cover sickness, it's holiday, sickness, unforeseen, additional route, all the things that could potentially go wrong in that service. And that's what we're looking at now. That's the work that Matt is undertaking specifically as head of service, to look at those and what the proposals are, what we can do to bring it down. So within the monitoring report that will be presented to Cabinet, it identifies some key themes in there in terms of areas that we look at. But one of the things that we've agreed recently is to put additional resources in HR with the specific purpose of supporting Matt's team with regards to sickness management. So there's lots of plans in terms of what we do next in terms of trying to bring that down.
Thank you, Matt.
Councillor Austin.
I think you've probably answered my question, Matt. I wanted to pick up on right at the very end of your report, you talked about the different measures that you were trying to bring in and whatever. So the meetings and so on, the analysis of the specific, this is the way that your team is supporting delivery teams to do that. Have I got that right? Is there anything else that's going on with regard to that councillors should know about that you haven't mentioned?
No, it is exactly that. The difference is we've always supported from a monitoring perspective. So my team have always gone out and met with individual managers, sometimes with heads of service as well, sometimes as a collective, sometimes individually. That's all still happening in the same way as it was on a monthly basis. The difference now is that once that information is produced, that head of service is going to come and sit with their director, with the chief executive, with the 151 officer, and we're going to say, okay, you've said that it's 800,000, but we can't have an £800,000 overspend. So what is it that we've got to do? So what you would then find is that if decisions were taken, for example, to drop something in order to be able to deliver efficiencies, and it impacted on councillors generally in terms of, your wards or whatever else, information would start coming out through the monitoring report that goes to Cabinet, so that you can start seeing that information, so you can see what's actually being delivered from them measures to be able to reduce that overspend. So yeah.
Councillor Green.
Did I hear you right that there's a 52% underspend on the housing revenue capital?
Yes.
And if so, is that intentional, or is that disappointing in view of our homelessness problem?
The capital programme in terms of housing, so when you talk about, so HRA is the one that has underspent, but in terms of acquisitions, obviously we've built the money into the capital programme to be able to acquire properties, but having the properties available and actually completing on them is a different thing altogether. So a number of reports have been brought through Cabinet to approve the acquisition of properties in terms of the approvals that are required. That money just hasn't been defrayed yet, as in the properties haven't been completed, and as a result we haven't actually handed that money over to the developers. What we are doing within the monitoring moving forward is trying to re-profile the budget so that if that takes that type of thing into account. It's one of the things that I've discussed in here previously, is I don't want to keep coming back saying that we agreed a capital programme of 70 million, but we've only managed to spend 20 of it, on the basis of slippage. because we could plan for some of that slippage over the course of the year and build the capital programme into future years. So the monitoring report that we're bringing for the first quarter identifies that we're moving some money around so that we don't have to keep coming back and reporting slippage. We've now identified that there's a longer time frame for actually delivering some of those schemes, and as a result, the money's been slipped. I think it also refers to like the tower block programme within there, and there was an expectation to deliver some of that. Because of the delays, which I think have been reported separately, that's impacted on that. So there's a number of quite major schemes, and it looks like Bob may want to contribute more in relation to that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Yeah, just a little bit more detail. So firstly, on the HRA Development and Acquisitions Programme, so we did bring an update report in March showing exactly where we are across the programme, so what schemes have been agreed, what schemes have been completed, what ones are in the pipeline, and we are working on another report that will come through to Cabinet in September, and OSP, it will come here in October with the 6 monthly update, and we'll continue to bring 6 monthly updates across the whole of that programme. Matt's absolutely right. You know, it's very difficult to project the timescales for some of those programmes. The projects are quite long term, so the timescales for getting construction on site really is up to about 2 years from kind of concept to the start of construction, and then we need to spend the money through the construction period. And similarly, if we're working on an acquisitions programme with developers, we're very much in their hands about the timescale for delivery. But those 6 monthly reports will give you up-to-date information against where we are with that programme. Also, just a little bit more detail about the tower block programme. So that's within the tenant leaseholder services element of the HRA capital programme. That is one of the major projects that is behind timeline. We are in contract with Mears for the delivery of that work. You will have maybe seen that we've already started erecting scaffolding at Harbour Towers and Trove Court in Ramsgate, and we'll be moving on to the other blocks fairly soon. We're also going to be progressing with the removal of the external wall insulation, but we haven't been able to progress the schemes any quicker than that because we're waiting for the building safety regulator to sign off the details of some aspects of the project. So that has caused a fairly significant delay with that, but so we are progressing that as quickly as we can and as far as we can. Just one other point to say, Sally O'Sullivan does bring quarterly updates on the tenant leaseholder services here. The next one I think will be coming in September. And there's a dedicated performance page on the tower block programme in that pack. Some of the information I've just shared with you would have been shared with you previously, but let's say the details will be in the next update report as well.
So are you saying that those delays, recovering those delays, will use up the capital budget by the end of the year, or do you have alternative capital projects to use it?
We won't be moving the money from approved programmes to other programmes, if that's what you're asking. The money has been approved for very specific purposes, and we'll use it for those purposes. We are, and I think Matt did say this, we're working to try and reprofile where we can, and if we know that expenditure is going to be incurred in the next financial year or even the financial year after, we'll move those amounts into those future years. But we won't use the money to deliver other things that haven't been approved, if that's the question.
Councillor Wing.
Thank you. Sorry. Could I just go to Maritime and Technical Services? The headline on the little document that's here is 398k shortfall compared with the budget. And it says it's due to restricted opportunities for one-off income streams such as car ferries. So am I making the assumption that when the budget was put together, we assumed that we might get some of those and I'm assuming it's the big vessel that brings in the cars that then sit on the port and then go to other places. So what was that an expectation that we were going to bring something in that hasn't happened?
Not exactly. So so historically there was an income target built in where we didn't know where. So there's a lot of ad hoc business historically that took place at the port. So we've had storage of containers, we've had generator storage, we've had the jack-up barge turn up, which all generate significant additional income over and above that was previously budgeted. What we didn't do was allocate the 398 in there, but the 360,000. We didn't allocate that to specific budget lines. We would have a whole raft of individual variances. So there was a generic target that was put in, which ferries is an example. Is historically it was met from things like the ferries, the additional transport. Animal exports was another one historically that's generated revenue that contributed towards that. There's an expectation, obviously, that we try and manage that in year, and depending on what activity takes place will dictate whether or not we can or can't achieve that. So yeah, it's income that's budgeted. We just don't know specifically what activity it is that would generate it, if at all.
Is it because I remember the two derricks? There was the big derrick that stayed a number of years, and then a little one came, and the big one left. I overlooked the port, so I loved seeing things come and go, and that one stayed a long time. Are we working on opportunities to try and generate that type of business coming in?
So I think it's identified within the report that there are separately conversations taking place in relation to what next in relation to maritime, and there'll be a separate report brought in terms of what the expectations are, what we're doing, what opportunities there are, if any. So that's going to be picked up separately.
Also, the flap gates, because I think the work on the gates and the flap gates took place a number of years ago, didn't it, initially? And so we've got a write-off of 479k, and the flap gate, I think, is the bit that comes up, not the gates that shut. Why was it a project that went wrong, and we're trying to recoup that money from the original company that put in the dodgy flap gate?
It's difficult for me to say that it was a dodgy flap gate, but effectively there were works that were undertaken, and not long after works were undertaken there was a failure of the hydraulics. So that then created a load of additional costs, and because of the nature of the port and harbour, specifically the harbour in this instance, there's a secondary, so you've got the flap gates and you've got the mitre gate, and if one or other of them fails, you've only got them one. We're in a situation where you have to make a decision. Are you prepared to run the risk of the secondary system failing and all of coming in one morning and all the vessels are sitting on the... So rather than wait until we could negotiate with the contractor because of the time delays it would have taken, we then undertook works to correct it, and those works built up over a period of time. And as a result, we accumulated all those costs and held them, and basically held the contractor liable for the original losses. Effectively, the advice is we would find it very difficult to pursue it, less than 50-50 chance of success. So we then have to take a decision based on the financial viability of pursuing it, and the decision is it's probably more cost effective to write it off, as horrible as it is, than it is to pursue it. That's not to say that they won't continue to look at opportunities to see whether there is any mechanism for redress. But at the moment, we can't see that there is. And from an accounting perspective, because there's no certainty about recovering those funds now, the point where we set them aside, there was a potential opportunity to recover. As soon as we knew from an accounting perspective that the likelihood of recovery was slim, we had to make a decision to be able to write it off.
Following on from that, because it sounds to me as we need to review that whole situation and try and work out lessons learned. So looking back at that work and that contract we handed to that company, what made the flap gate fail or not be as good as it should, and what lessons can we learn going forward? Because we know that any work that is undertaken in and around the port is going to be in quite a horrendous environment, so it's always going to cost, and it always needs to have the best materials and the best workforce there.
So specifically, Mike is looking at that particular issue. I think it's fair to say he knows where it went wrong from a contractor perspective. He knows what the issues are. He's fully, he's been involved from the beginning. What he is doing is looking at opportunities to minimise the risk of that moving forward. Now that might be a decision that, in order to protect the harbour, we've got the hydraulics. We purchase a secondary set of hydraulics so that if any failure, all we need is a contractor to come in and install them, rather than having to bring in a contractor that's got to come in and take the whole thing apart and rebuild it effectively. So.
Other thing is it's the legal and consultancy costs of the 215k relating to the port concession project. I'm assuming that was our search for a ferry. So those I sort of, I don't know, felt that those would be coming out of the levelling up money, and now that the legal and consultancy costs have been dumped in with the maritime and technical services. So that was the loss we made as a council in pursuing a ferry. And I know that was a political decision, not an officer decision.
It's not the loss associated with pursuing a ferry. There was a separate report, as I remember, that was taken to Cabinet. I think, in actual fact, I think there's been 2 reports that have identified that there was a cost outside of levelling up that wasn't. It's a revenue cost and it's a capital scheme. There is no funding within LUF to fund revenue costs. So the decision was taken that we would effectively get the relevant experts involved in order to make sure that we had the best opportunity possible. There was a separate Cabinet report that identified funds to be able to facilitate that, which was a contribution from reserves. The way the report is presented is that everything that's associated with, it's an overspend because there's not a specific budget line for it, but there is a separate approval to effectively fund that from reserves. So that decision was taken during the course of the year and the previous year. So there was part cost, and then the rest of the cost for 24-25. So I don't think it's necessarily the cost of failure. We would have incurred those costs whatever happened, whether we looked at the opportunity or not in that respect.
Councillor Davis?
Overexcited there. I'll address my comments to the Chair because obviously Matt can only account for decisions taken, but I do think once again we find ourselves here, given this debacle with the hydraulics, what happened to due diligence? What happened to ensuring either that the design was right or that the contractor was capable and fit and proper? So yet again, we have questions revolving around lack of application of due diligence, and I think that needs to be marked and remembered. And we've gone past the future work programme item on the agenda, but I do think this is something we need to look at as an authority, because we keep hearing, oh, this didn't work or that didn't work, and it's always outside contractors. The independent monitoring officer specifically said that we need to stop passing the buck to outside contractors on everything we do. So consequently, you know, I understand the rationale that we needed to take control of this, but in which case we should have done that in the first place. You know, we keep throwing money at things.
But we are on the budget.
What price accountability? Yeah, but what
Obviously
price
that's questions to be
accountability?
asked
So
for a different officer. Yeah.
okay.
I get it. Any further questions? Councillor Scobie.
Sorry, it was just a quick one more out of curiosity. What licence do you as a finance team have to move losses on particular projects between years? Do the auditors and the rules around sort of local government make it quite difficult, or do you have some authority to decide when to do so? The reason for asking the question is this year looking bad because officers to an extent looked at it and went, we're going to have a bad year, let's realise losses that we weren't sure about here so that then we can move forwards and have a couple more positive years, or is that not the picture at all?
Yeah, that's not the picture at all. I mean, ultimately, in terms of losses, we have a requirement to. So it's different if it's a capital scheme that you're incurring costs over a profile period and it's covering different years. But when you're talking about, for the most part, the overspend that we're talking about is the 4.7 million, which is a revenue overspend. We have to account for that in the period at which it relates. There is no opportunity to slip it. The only flexibility there is in terms of accounting rules is at what point you make a decision, for example, with regards to write-off. We've made the decision that it's the right time to do that because there's enough information available to say that, you know, we're not going to pursue it. Previously, we held that on balance. You didn't see that 479,000 in the monitoring position. That's where we have flexibility from an accounting perspective, but not in relation to, we couldn't effectively recognise the loss this year in order to have a surplus, unlike the private sector, I suppose.
Any further questions? No. So what's the general picture for this year, based on what happened last year, where you said you're having meetings all the time now? Where are we on target now with the budget that we had this year?
We're not on target. So the first quarter monitoring report is due to be published, I think Nick will correct me if I'm wrong, tomorrow, for Cabinet next week. So the report will be published tomorrow. At the moment, I would say it is a better position than what I've reported here, but it would be very difficult for it to be worse. But there is still an overspend at the moment. Primarily, when you see the report, it is due to the same issues. What I would say is the first quarter doesn't assume anything in relation to these other pieces of work that I'm talking about. So, for example, if cleansing is showing a significant overspend again, that's because there isn't anything factored into that report at quarter one to actually, with regards to the works and mitigations, to be able to bring it down. The target is that by the midpoint of the year, we'll have a much better understanding of what that's going to look like and what systems are in place to make sure we manage it down over the course. We're not in a position at the moment where we, for example, are talking about moratoriums on spend, but that is a potential solution to any problems moving forward in terms of, what happens next is that you restrict spend into essential spending only, but we're not in that position at the moment.
Excellent, thanks, Matt. Sorry, yeah, Councillor Packman.
Sorry, it might be oversight to the thousands of emails we get, but do we get a quarterly report as councillors on the financial state of the council?
The budget monitoring report that I've just referred to that goes to Cabinet, it's published, it's in the public domain, it's available for everybody to review, and it talks about what the financial position is anticipated to be at the end of the year and what we're doing to try and mitigate it. It's all contained within that quarterly monitoring report. So technically we would normally aim for 4 reports, one for each quarter, and then an outturn report, which is what you're looking at now, which is effectively the end monitoring report for the year.
And we get that direct in our inboxes, do we? Okay. Would it be worth us actually getting that directly into our inboxes? Please, can we make a suggestion of that? Because I find it really, I know it's out, like you say, it's in the public domain, but we find out too late. And I think we raised this when we were new councillors, of a rag-rated kind of Excel spreadsheet of when things are going well and things aren't going well. Because we hear about things when things go wrong. We don't hear about things where maybe things are potentially going wrong. So I think we asked this 2 years ago when we first come onto overview and scrutiny. We were told, no, it's too complicated. But certainly, I'm not just talking about finance, but regeneration and housing and things like that, we hear about it too late and then we scrutinise it, and it's like, well, could we have an opportunity to scrutinise it before it goes wrong?
So you're asking to scrutinise the quarterly reports. So do they come to next quarterly reports? Come to
But they can do it if they want to.
not on this agenda, but they're out tomorrow to go to Cabinet.
Because that was my question is, wouldn't that be really important contextual information for,
Matt's chomping at the bit.
Matt is chomping at the bit. From this year, it's actually on the agenda to come to overview and scrutiny. So it will go to Cabinet next week, and then that same report is being brought to overview and scrutiny for your consideration to cover exactly the issues that you just referred to.
They took your suggestions on board when you first joined 2 years ago.
after it should come to us first for comments. Yeah, and then that's the bit. So then we don't get to comment because our role is to provide recommendations to Cabinet so if you do it the other way round, if our report comes in October, we're going to give comments on a report that September, give comments on a report that they've already approved.
The report will be brought for noting, so it will go to Cabinet. It will then come here for noting. If you decide that there's something you wanted to go back to Cabinet, you can refer it back to Cabinet. It would just be dealt with as part of the process for the next one. My understanding is that this is the route that was agreed in terms of the reporting.
Do you want to come back, Jack?
Yeah, Chair, can I maybe ask you to take this back to whoever you need to take this back to and pick this up, because I think Councillor Scobie is right. I think it does need to be the other way around, but also think it's not just finance we need to be looking at. It's the overview of the council, because there are other areas that are really doing well and we want to give our compliments and say really well done, but there are areas that maybe we still don't know about that are going wrong, and we need to know about it before it gets to crisis level.
I don't think Nick in to just explain the process.
Yeah, so the next council performance indicators report will be coming to the next OSP meeting in September. So that is the everything else that we were talking about. So from September onwards, we will be reviewing both the financial and the performance data of the council. So that is all the data there is to scrutinise. It's absolutely okay for you to raise the question about when that is. Cabinet have made it very clear that that's the position that they would like to look at. They would like to look at that information first. You can by all means make a recommendation about that, but as I say, that is for them to decide. You can, as I say, you will have the opportunity at the end of those consideration of those items to make any recommendations if you want. They are for noting, but if you feel strongly about something that you think that the performance in X area isn't good enough, or we're spending too much money in Y, you can make recommendations back to Cabinet to say, we think you should make a concerted effort to do something about this. That's absolutely fine. So yeah, we've acknowledged the fact it's not as, it potentially hasn't been as good as we would like it, but that from September will change dramatically. And I think, as I say, the monitoring that Overview and Scrutiny is designed to look at will be coming to this panel from September onwards, both performance and from a finance point of view.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I will be at Cabinet next week. If you want me to ask the leader if he wants to do it the other way around so we can look at it first, I'll gladly pose that question for you. Councillor Scobie.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think it has to be, because otherwise we could, as a committee, just have an agenda item where we, the month before it goes to, or the week before it goes to Cabinet, that we're going to have a discussion about it without a report and then make recommendations on that, which doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we should definitely be seeing it beforehand. Just on Councillor Packman's comment around more broadly, I think that's where we've got to be clear on roles here, because we're not the executive, we scrutinise the executive. So I pushed for this last year when Councillor Everett as leader came and talked about progress on the corporate plan. I think that's the way to do it, is to ask the Cabinet members to come and talk about risks in their areas, or Councillor Everett as leader of the council on performance overall. I don't think it's our role to get into that level of detail. That's what the Cabinet is doing to the SMT, as far as I'm aware, is that they are the portfolio holders, making sure that officers are following the overall plan and the strategies that we want to do, and our role is to scrutinise the Cabinet scrutinising and leading the council. So I think we've got to make sure that we don't try and double the amount of work on this, but I think we certainly should be asking Cabinet members to come more often and talk about the risks in their areas and areas that we're concerned about, which was, ironically, I was concerned about last year's budget, and so asked Councillor Yates to come to this meeting to talk about last year's budget, and we got a report on it anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, I'll honestly post that next week. If you could, I mean, obviously he's your leader, not my leader, but their leader. I mean, if you could back me on that, that'd be great. Councillor Davis.
I just wanted to reiterate, because the policy is supposed to be that stuff comes through scrutiny to Cabinet, and as in fact recent external training said, it's a complete and utter waste of time just to note stuff, because it's meaningless. If we're going to scrutinise it, let's scrutinise it, and as Cabinet's critical friend, I think is the preferred phrase, then we can, as a panel, if we believe there's good grounds, as we're having a perfectly good discussion now, saying the process, so we can then make those recommendations. We're well aware, obviously, that Cabinet doesn't have to listen to them; they are the executive. But at least if we've raised those issues, and as we've seen on numerous occasions in the recent past, if they're raised, it's up to Cabinet what they do with them. But it's better that we get that opportunity in advance rather than retrospective. And as I say, I'm just noting a report that achieves very little, if anything. So I agree with Councillor Packman and Councillor Scobie, and thank you for raising that.
Point taken, I'm sure we all agree. And on that note, do we all note the report? Oh, sorry, Councillor.
I mean, I worked in a school that shut down, and you think you got all these years, so I just wanted to ask, the next 3 years are going to go like that. Do we, every time this budget comes, what is our stop position when we get to that threshold point of we're no longer Thanet District Council, we're going to be merging, or however we're going to be merging? So have we got, are we thinking about, because now we're in a completely different situation, aren't we? So is that on the back burner? And is there a series of thresholds or levels in terms of our finance that we or I'm sure it won't be one level, I'm sure it will be an area where we definitely don't want to be over that, we definitely don't want to be under here. We want to try and get the budget to that point when we disappear.
I sort of mentioned it earlier in terms of we would be looking to set a budget for 26, 27, 27, 28, because we'll have indicative numbers in relation to 28, 29, but we don't know what anything's going to look like in 28, 29. Obviously, aspirationally, we don't want to completely diminish reserves during 26, 27, 27, 28, and actually the government have sent letters out identifying there will be a point in time where you can't do that. They've given thresholds in terms of what their expectation will be around spend, and they are, they're talking about £100,000 contracts. Well, a contract for 3 years is easy to hit a 100,000 threshold. So there'll be a point in time where you'll need approval from effectively what is going to be the new entity before you can enter into those contracts. So there's lots of checks and measures that are being put in place in order to avoid a situation that like you're referring to. And obviously from Chris's perspective as the Section 151 officer, last thing you'd want to do is be talking about us not having any money in the run up to LGR. I think it is worth noting though that our reserves and the reserves across Kent are a drop in the ocean in comparison to when you start looking at counties and deficits and everything else. So we're small fry in comparison, but we want to deliver a balanced budget. We want to continue to deliver the services for the taxpayers of Thanet whilst we still exist. So.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Okay, moving on to item number 6. That question again. We all note that. Okay, moving on to item number 6, the Simplification Pathfinder Pilot Programme update. Call on Louise to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. You're all going to have to bear with me a little bit. Today's first day back after 10 days annual leave, and so the brain cells are just slowly wearing back into place. So the report I'm presenting this evening went to Cabinet on the 24th of July as part of a more regular update on the Pathfinder programme. It's not a decision report, but Overview and Scrutiny are invited to note the report and consider any representations to Cabinet. Regeneration exists because of market failure. It delivers things that are not easily fundable or deliverable by the private or not-for-profit sector. Regeneration schemes tend to be difficult to deliver, which is why they sit with local authorities. Over a period of time, we've successfully been awarded over £51 million, and it's taken time for the council to have the right resources across the whole organisation to be able to deliver these schemes. The nature of the council's regeneration programme is highly complex and diverse. All of the projects are complex, involving a range of property, construction, planning, service delivery and partnership issues requiring significant time from the delivery teams, and key decisions to be taken by the Cabinet on a number of milestones through each of the project timelines. There are many successes outlined in the programme, with projects in construction like Newington Community Centre, and the Margate Creative Land Trust has purchased 2 sites. East Kent Colleges Group expects to receive students in the Margate Digital Campus this year, and we have contractors engaged for our Ramsgate projects. We're currently out to tender for the skate park contractor. So much is going on, and it's a fast-moving and exciting time across the programme. We are also pleased that central government provided us with formal approval for the extension of into the 26-27 financial year, which gives the council, its stakeholders, comfort in relation to the timeline for delivery. The information in this report includes a project-by-project overview of the schemes in the Pathfinder programme, with high-level timelines for each project at Appendix 1. And Appendix 2, there is a financial update for the programme. This includes the budget position for each project, spend to date, and information on the type of spend. This hopefully helps to show where funding has been spent and what is remaining to deliver the schemes. It's worth noting that where we've moved across from one finance system to another, there's still some reconciliation that is happening, and the teams are still working on that. So the position may slightly change in the next update, but that's more about where commitments have been taken out, purchase orders have been closed down, where they're no longer needed. So that piece of work is happening, and that will be reflected in the next update that we bring. It's also worth noting that the report and the information held within it were correct at the time of publication for the Cabinet meeting. Some of this information may have and will change as we move through project development and delivery stages. We have committed to providing more regular updates for the programme through Cabinet to help keep people informed as we move through delivery phases. And we are also working on a big update in terms of our web pages and the newsletters that we send out through the Margate and Ramsgate databases and information that we provide through to the Wave. So before I open up for any questions, I note at the beginning of the meeting you talked about Councillor Duckworth bringing an update on regeneration projects as a presentation. It would be useful to understand whether it's across the Pathfinder programme, so you've got an update here on the whole programme, which is relatively recent, or whether there is something else from a regeneration perspective that you would like Councillor Duckworth to present on. Thank you.
That's a point taken. I will discuss that. Okay, members, questions? Councillor Pope.
Thank you. Thanks for this report. It is really complex and amazing how many things are in the pipeline. So, yeah, really interesting to read. I was just wondering, it says about asking for a couple of projects about extending the deadline. I wondered if we knew what the likelihood was of that happening, if there was a plan B if it didn't happen, if it's likely that it will be extended for all of them or only some. I appreciate you might not know the answer to that, but...
Is that in relation to the question from central government around extending into 26-27? So we have that approval. Our reporting to central government is it's one financial line on capital and one on revenue. So we don't report finance on a project by project basis. It's just across the programme, which then allows us, if there's a little bit of slippage in some of the projects in terms of time frame, it just gives that bit of flexibility, where we report on committed and uncommitted spend as well. So anything that's committed, so with a contractor, that's always in the committed line, reporting back to central government. So that 26-27 approval was provided with March 2027 as a hard stop date. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Something I've raised with you a number of times, Louise, is many of these projects, if not all of them, are going to require management on an ongoing basis in future years, and that presumably is going to have an impact on the revenue budget. Are we addressing that?
Yep, so we shall be bringing a report, I'm going to say the autumn because I can't remember what it is, but I think it's on the forward plan, that will provide information on all of those schemes that have management requirements, what the plan is. It will be going to Cabinet because there will be some decisions within that, and I suspect they will be key, so it'll be coming here first.
And on top of that, moving on from Dave's question, there's a lot of stuff looking on Annex 2 that's going to be coming to fruition in the spring, summer and autumn of 2026. Are we confident that, one, you have enough officers, enough man hours in your day, or woman hours, enough building control and planning officers to cope with all this that's going to come on board all at the same time?
So we are working with all of the teams that you've mentioned, so planning, building control, colleagues, and they have got that kind of timeline, so they know when our schemes are at different stages. We're doing things like pre-app advice and pre-advice from building control so that they know where we are and they are inputting at the front end, so it's not all at the back end. We've also got our own team, but external teams, so our project management, cost management teams that all have roles. So yes, lots of things are coming together at one time, but actually that's the easier bit. In the run up to getting them to that, getting them on the ground and in construction is the harder bit. So yeah, we're confident that we'll be okay.
Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Louise. I'm going to try and summarise because again, as usual, I have more questions than answers from what's going on with this. But I've got a couple of questions to ask, and they're details from the annexes. Taking them in the order that they are, we've got the Clockhouse and Pier Yard. I notice there's a traffic revision order booked to remove the parking, which obviously impacts on our revenue as a council. However, I'd see no mention of that traffic revision order taking into account vehicle access to the slipways, the fishing facilities and the crosswall and all where the vehicles are necessary to go to the marina. Is that, are we doing away with the parking and half doing the job, because surely that traffic revision order should also define where the traffic can still cross the pier yard, which we have been promised it will be to ensure the viability of the slipways, fishing facilities, need I go on. With regard to the fishing facilities, I see we're still trying to pass off what has to be a derisory amount, given that the industry in Ramsgate has bucked the trend, and we have these new vessels. And it isn't really bucking the trend; it's because of the cyclical nature of fishing. But given that we've gone from 8 to 13 vessels, I think we need to be recommending a rethink on this so that the fishing facilities are what is necessary. Because one of the things that we don't hear about in this update is the pier head, which was part of the Simplification Pathfinder and the various other funds. And yet, despite there being 3 leaseholders who apparently are being given notice, have been given notice from their units on the pier head, where they have had grants of about 90,000 each and installed their own fish processing facilities. If we move them out to restore the pier head, those grants become repayable and we become liable. There's 270,000. That's immediately to compensate those leaseholders. Why are we not getting any updates on the pier head and what is going on with it and the restoration of it? If they're moved out of there, that has implications, which surely simple logic says that a bigger processing facility for the entire fishing fleet would mitigate the cost of having to repay those grants that those individual fishermen have got. So we need to look closely, I think, at a recommendation that the whole fishing thing needs addressing properly, because it seems to me we make things up and then we undo them. It's the same thing with this value engineering on the Green Campus, and on that, what I'd like to ask is, where's the business plan? Because there's a lot of talk about external funding, what's necessary to deliver the next building, but are we engaged with the stakeholders and the harbour businesses? And I'm not talking about coffee sellers and bacon sandwich sellers, I'm talking about marine businesses that support the economy of the harbour and the port. Are we engaged with them? Are we talking to them? Because some of them are trying to expand and invest in their businesses. Not at all, Chair, I'm afraid, because this is absolutely vital. There are people trying to invest. We hear a lot about regeneration and the need for inward investment. If we're going to bring inward investment in, let's bring it in, let's accept it, and let's work it into what we are trying to achieve. Because at the moment, I don't believe there's any grounds that support the Green Campus. We're talking to people, certainly doesn't seem to be the people that are already our key stakeholders and are key to the economy down there. So there's no business plan, You know, and we're now allocating millions more pounds for it. I don't understand. So maybe somebody could explain it to me, because, you know, I've seen references here about costs increasing because we left the EU. We're still trying to blame Brexit for inflation. It's in the report. It's in the report. But those are key questions, and there's a lot more, but...
Thanks for the questions. I'll start with an easy one. Pierhead wasn't a Levelling Up Fund project, so that's why it's not included in the programme update. It was never a scheme as part of the Levelling Up Fund. The road traffic order for Pier Yard includes the removal of some parking, and we have looked at the revenue implications and the revenue opportunities on opening up Pier Yard for other activities and events, and our finance colleagues are comfortable that they should outweigh each other as part of that process. As we've updated at all of the meetings where we've talked about this, there will be access to the harbour. It's a working harbour, and we need access through the across the East Pier and to the commercial quay. So that shall remain open. As I said, it's a working harbour. I mean, if Overview and Scrutiny want to make recommendations around the fishing facility, then that's up to the panel. Obviously, these are all approved projects with cabinet approvals, and so this is an update on where we are in terms of delivery. We're not in a position to be changing the projects at this stage. In terms of Green Campus, we did hold a green event down at the Sea Cadets facility maybe a couple of months ago. Sorry, losing track of time. We had a really good event. We engaged with some maritime and green businesses as part of that, and we have continued engagement with them, including an organisation that's starting up and testing some renewables in the harbour. In the port, and we are working with them to think about what their needs are. We're also working with a boat building company to see what their needs are, thinking about the spaces that we've got within the Green Campus. I think at the last discussion around the Green Campus, we talked about holding another stakeholder event. What we wanted to do is have a bit more information around the design of the building. That's due to be submitted to planning this week, and that gives us an opportunity to actually hang that stakeholder engagement activity on in terms of talking to those organisations that we have been engaging with. We've also talked to the Thames Estuary Growth Board about this sector, and we've been working with them in the past to put together some information for their prospectus. They've got I can't remember what they've called it, but an investable opportunities for the Thames Estuary area, and we've been talking to them about some sector specific work, so maritime, green, creative industries as well. So that engagement will continue, and the business plan bit, the management side of things, as I said, that's coming to Cabinet for approval. I'm wrong, it's not in on the floor plan for October, it is going on for November as part of that decision making, so it will come to this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. You've answered some of what I needed to know there. I don't understand how we can go for detailed planning on the Green Campus when we don't actually know what's going in it. It's just, we're going to design something and then have to value engineer, I think was the phrase we've used, and spend more money, keep revising what we came up with in the first place, which wasn't fit for purpose. The same thing with the fishing facilities. Oh, it came up at 12 million. Well, who came up with that? We did. And then it's too much money. This is the point I'm making, and I'd also like to make a point for the record. it's not even a functioning port properly, but we are not on the Thames Estuary. The Thames Estuary Growth Board is, whether we as a council chose to sign up to support it, it is about estuary ports and things. Ramsgate is not on the Thames Estuary, for the record.
Sorry, was there a question there? Oh, okay. David?
The pier yard must be due to come to planning fairly soon now, I'd have thought. And you, last time I asked, you said you were going to hold a public display event before that.
So we're just going through the proposals at the moment for PRD. So we're still aiming to take it to planning, hopefully by the end of this year. But we're just working through that programme at the moment with the contractor. But yeah, we should be bringing it this year.
And are you going to do a public presentation before that?
Yeah, so we're hoping, so we're going to go through design review panel, and then following that, once we submit, we're hoping to do some kind of engagement. We just need to liaise with planning around what that looks like, if it's going to be a kind of formal process or a lighter engagement. But we will be bringing boards. We're just kind of going through where the kind of best place is for the event to take place, and yeah, what we'll present to the public. So there will be a kind of formal engagement.
Councillor Austin.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Louise. Annex 1 is the thing that we have been asking for all this time, and it's absolutely brilliant to see it all brought together with all that detail. It's fantastic. Annex 2, the pie chart on page 88 is really scary. The one that shows how little money we've actually spent. And out there, you know what keyboard warriors are going to be saying. You know, why have we not spent this money? You know, is it, you know, brown envelopes, you know, staff asleep at their desks, all that stuff that goes on out there. So my usual question, you know, I ask you every time, don't I, Louise? Comms, how are we going to get the messages out about where we are with these things, what people can expect to see when? Are we going to do the basic stuff like put up hoardings around the pier yard, etc., all those things? How are we going to reassure people that we have extended the deadline? And it would have been nice if councillors had been told that we'd extended the deadline, like, rather than finding it out in the... I think it was at the cabinet meeting. You know, we didn't get any notification. We don't get notification about new staff. We really need to know about these things, particularly those of us whose wards are directly affected. But how are we going to get the message out there to the public who are very, very twitchy? And if they see that pie chart, they're going to be even more twitchy.
Thanks. The information, the approval from central government came the day before the report was published. So it had up until the day before, it had a holding bit that said, we're waiting to hear. So it just, that happened really quickly. So we were pleased that we had that information to be able to share. I think differently about the pie chart. I know it means that money hasn't gone out the door, but actually what it means is there's still plenty of money there to do the delivery on the ground. We've got one in construction, we've got one due to start relatively soon on the clock house, and as we start in construction, that's where we want the money to be spent. There's been lots of discussion about too much money on contractors and services and not enough for delivery. Well, actually, that shows you that the percentage that we talk about around fees is actually in line with, you know, national standards. And then we've got not plenty of money, but the money's there to do the delivery. So that's how I see the pie chart. And as we come to each update of the programme, you'll see that bit getting smaller as we're going through delivery. we have just had final review of the information that are going to go on the hoardings for us to just look over before it goes to a designer. Our plan is to have a generic set of hoardings that go on both Margate and Ramsgate schemes. So we will be promoting the different projects in the different towns. And there's it's basic information, but then there's a QR code to find out more. As part of that process, we're also updating the website so that more information is on there. As I would always say, I would always urge people to sign up to the Wave, sign up to the Ramsgate and Margate newsletters, because we are, more so the Wave, we're always making sure that there are stories in there on updates on the projects. And we are doing, like I said, a piece of work on the website, and we are just working on a Margate update newsletter. We did a Ramsgate one not long ago, and so we're just going to, we'll keep working on those. But I think the hoardings will be really good, particularly across the Clock House, because they're very visual. That's the main project that most people will be able to see. I think that was everything.
Could I just come back with one specific question? Just looking at the length of time things have taken and all of that to get where we are. Broad Street, according to this, it says planning application went in November 2023, and then the procurement process that didn't actually turn out to find anybody that was right ended in January 2025, so that's more than a year. Can you explain why that took so long?
So I think we took it to planning at possibly the end of REBA stage 3, and so obviously we did a bit more work on the REBA stages before it went out to procurement. It went onto the prioritised list in terms of procurement, but there were a number of schemes going forward, and then and obviously we had the failed procurement exercise, which is frustrating. We are working with Wilmot Dixon now. They are looking at all of the survey information that we've got, the designs. They will be taking that all on as a design and build contract. We have got a slight delay in terms of the communication stuff on the roof. It's taken longer to get off, but actually we don't have to put it back on. We've got it will be a permanent take off unless we want it back on there. So we're kind of accepting the delay and the seagulls nesting on the top of the building to just give us that time to work with Wilmot Dixon to make sure it's all right and up front. So and we also had some staff implications during that period as well.
That's the wing.
I too like both documents. I think they're brilliant, and I think it's what we've been waiting for. As a school teacher, that's just what I would have had for most of my projects at school. But and I'm wondering whether, I mean, once we start building stuff, the money will soon fly out, and we'll be sat there going, have we got enough? So there'll be another issue. But I'm wondering whether, I mean, the Newington bit is racing ahead, isn't it, which is good, and whether we colour code. So I would use green, amber, we're tracking away, we're doing okay. Green is maybe we're there and we're finished, and red is we need to be alert to that. So that's something I would have done in my documents at school. I could have just flicked into that also with young people that I tracked as well to see whether I needed to do something. And I think he's trying to make it simple and visual for people, but they're great documents. I just googled the Thames estuary, and it's interesting because Manston Airport is on there. You'll be pleased to know. But it's very. I think we're that close to London, and I think the guy on the slipway, that company is a London-based company. I think with many London barges that are coming down here on our slipway to be mended, and apparently 4 tugs. So I think there is a direct connection to us in London, and we should be exploiting all those rich people in London as best we can. I do have some concerns about the fishing fleet, but it's about sitting down and talking and trying to find ways through. And Pier Yard, I think I brought up the situation of getting into the the rest of that, the harbour side, and I think that we'll see that that's been addressed in any planning application that comes forward, and I sit on planning anyway, so I'll be able to make special attention to that. But I'm just thinking that the loss of parking isn't going to be a big issue if we actually do something constructive on there. So a Christmas market come to mind with some 4'6" sheds that we charge an awful lot of money for businesses to have with the lights on in the harbour will be good. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing things happening quite quickly.
Anybody else? Councillor Curry.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Louise. I recently saw an initial design of the Walpole Bay beach facilities, which was very exciting. And I just wondered, are we close to submitting a planning application, and is all on track for that project?
I think the answer to that is yes. Sorry, Natalie and I haven't crossed over. She's on annual leave. I know that there is a design meeting with the team tomorrow to do some final bits to the planning application, and I think it's either due to be submitted this week or next week. So yes, which is really exciting. So the team are working on that. I think it was slightly longer just in terms of taking into account some of the design review panel feedback following their review of the designs.
Anybody else? Just a quick one from me regarding the winter gardens. Obviously, I drive past quite a lot. It seems to be disappearing under big bushes and overgrown more every time we drive past. Are they all on track with their funding? And that's probably a question for Bob, really.
It's probably easy if I respond to that question. So you'll recall that we brought a report through that went to Cabinet earlier in the year, identifying the partner that we're working with on the winter gardens. That report set out a number of requirements that would need to be fulfilled before we progress to the next stage. So the next stage would be the confirmation of a lease and the grant agreement for the funding of the work. The key elements of those requirements are REBA Stage 2 designs for setting out the proposals for the building, the advice from a cost consultant about the costs attached to those REBA Stage 2 designs, reviewed business plan taking into account those costs that was independently verified, and proof of funding. We are expecting to have all of that information submitted from Westwood One by the end of this month, and we have some of it coming in already, and we should be then in a position to make a decision about proceeding to the next stage in September. So obviously we're not quite at that point yet, so that's not what I've just said is not quite reflected in the report that's in front of you, but by the time we get the next update, there will be more information to share about the winter gardens. But obviously in the interim, if there's any significant news, then we'll share that anyway.
Excellent. Quick one, Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. One quick question. Pierhead restoration isn't levelling up, you said. Which funds is it from, please?
Well, as far as we know, there isn't a budget for work at the pierhead, and we don't have an approved project for any work at the pierhead. So I'm not really sure what you're referring to in terms of a project. I mean, we can check with the team that manages the Port and Harbour, and if there's anything going on there that we're not aware of, we obviously can share that. But
we seem to have a cross wire here, Bob, and I think this is quite important because we've been briefed previously on the need and what needs to be done to that building. I was fully under the illusion that it was in these combined funds that have been put into the non-simplified simplification process. I'll come back to you because that we have been briefed on the repairs necessary to the pierhead building, and and those lessees are in the position they're in. So somebody somewhere knows something that we don't this evening, and I think that's quite concerning.
Yeah, the only bit that we're aware of is funding for concrete repairs to the building at the pier head. Is that what you're referring
There's
to?
repairs to the there was repairs to the building, but it was structural repairs to the entire thing, and also some safety upgrades in terms of escape.
Okay, I mean, I think we're not going to be able to answer your questions about that this evening. 'Cause obviously
No,
it's
that's
not
why I
relevant
say,
to this
but I'll
report.
go back and look at
But
where.
I'm more than happy to have a conversation with Mike, who's the director responsible for that area, so, and then we can feed back to you.
Okay, thank you.
So when you say pier head, is that the restaurant, the brass of it?
entire building.
Okay. Yeah, I seem to remember that we're going to upgrade the windows or something. Yeah, council wing.
It definitely came. I think it came to planning as well. Has it been to planning? I'm not sure, but it's definitely been discussed and it's definitely been approved. As to where the money comes from, I've got no idea, but I think it was necessary works because the building's in such a state.
Well, it's grade 2-star lift.
Yeah.
Okay, another day. So we're asked to note that report. Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, thanks, Louise. Moving on to item number 7, the Local Authority Housing Fund 3+, whatever that means. Call on Ashley Jackson.
Thank you. The council has been successful in obtaining a further £632,100 from the Local Authority Housing Fund, known as the LAF project, to fund acquisition of 4 more homes that the council will be able to utilise for temporary accommodation, 1 home, and resettlement purposes for 3 homes. Through the council's proactive acquisitions team, 4 homes have been identified that meet the criteria which the funding was allocated to Thanet District Council. The homes are 3 3-bedroomed homes at Vistry, Westwood Point, and 1 4-bedroomed home at BDW, Spitfire Green. The council has an existing relationship with both developers and it is assured that it is obtaining quality products here. The cost of the homes will be £943,487 for the 3-bedroomed homes and a further £360,000 for the 1 4-bed property. The LAF funding is generous, subsidising circa 40% of the cost of each property, and the finance section of the report sets out the viability for the acquisitions for the council. It's worth pointing out that originally round 3 of the funding was oversubscribed, yet many local authorities have had to return their monies to MHCLG through non-delivery. As a result, the council was invited to submit an expression of interest to secure further funding on top of the funding notified to OSP and Cabinet in July 2024. This again highlights the council is demonstrating its proven reliable delivery of homes through many mechanisms. These homes, which will achieve an anticipated EBC-B, will be added to the council's housing stock in due course. That's where the 3+ comes from on the report. Thanks.
Thanks, Ashley. Members, seen quite a few of these. Any questions? We're all happy?
Good news, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, definitely. So, if there's no questions or comments, we're asked to endorse the recommendations that Ashley set out, which are also in the report. Do I have a proposer for those? Councillor Pritchard and a seconder, Councillor Davis. And we all agree? Perfect, thank you. Thanks, Ashley. Okay, item number 8, revoking the First Homes interim policy statement. And that's Adrian Vell.
Actually, it was going to be Ashley, but I'm... Yeah, okay. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the report asks OSP to consider a report to go to Cabinet, which would recommend to Council that it formally revoke the First Homes interim policy statement. The IPS was based on a written statement and changes to planning and practice guidance back in May 2021, and the IPS was adopted by the Council on the 14th of July 2022. More recent changes to the MPPF mean that it no longer requires the delivery of first homes unless it's considered they meet a local need. There's been very little interest in the provision of first homes on new development sites. It's not considered that the provision of first homes meets a specific local need, and so the recommendation from officers is therefore that the IPS is revoked, which would mean that we would revert to using policy SP23 in its original form within the adopted Local Plan 2020 to assess the affordable housing requirement for new development without specific reference to first homes. This approach would be more closely aligned to local housing needs, The only other thing I would say is that obviously as part of the local plan process, we'll be reviewing housing needs, so that would inform future policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. Members, any questions? Councillor Patman.
Thank you, and thanks for the report. It's quite interesting to read if you're into housing, I suppose. For those that aren't, it'd be a bit... I'm into housing, all right. I just want to check that it said here that the council will still be delivering the shared ownership, because we have to make sure that younger generations can still get on the affordability ladder for buying a house. And obviously this First Homes initiative was to do that. I accept there's challenges to it due to kind of, as it's outlined in the report. What else are we doing as a council to try and promote? Because shared ownership's great if you can afford the mortgage and the rent, but sometimes that's double the outgoings. So what else are we doing as a council? Because, yeah, I'll be a bit reluctant otherwise.
If I kick off, I think Ashley will probably want to add something to that. But it's not actually specifically in the policy, but generally speaking, what we look for is a split of social rent, affordable rent, and shared ownership within the 30% affordable housing. So it's always a mix of those, if that's possible. Ashley, I don't know whether you want to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that. So the 70-30, so I do have a list of the expected shared ownership units that are coming forward over the next few years. That we don't offer shared ownership as a product at the moment, but I do know that big developers offer a kind of shared ownership. Like I know Barrett's do a shared ownership which is different to the government shared ownership scheme, but they kind of all do their own. And I noticed that the Places for People one and on Shottendane, they've all got they're all advertising their own shared ownership. But I can certainly provide a list of the shared ownership schemes that are coming up over the next few years. So there is that product as well as the rent. I know I always come about buying the affordable rented units, but it's important to know that the shared ownership is being delivered as well as alongside the rent as well.
So I think that was my question was, are we looking to take on a shared ownership route for potential buyers, for example?
Not at the moment, because the private market is delivering that really well. I mean, I never have any... We do work with all the housing associations and all the providers to work with them to advertise their shared ownership schemes, but we never have to because they're sold off plan and they have waiting lists. So it's never an issue and we never have to pick up any shared ownership. So we've not flipped any to rent. It's a really sought after product.
Thank you, I do agree.
Councillor Davis.
Again, I find myself agreeing with Councillor Packman. I just wanted to make the point that obviously if First Homes, and it seems the problem with First Homes is across the board, and I believe there were a lot of problems with mortgage provided or lack of mortgage provision, so you could have the greatest scheme under the sun, but if the underwriters won't cover it, there's not much point. The concern I have with, and again, I think shared ownership's a great way. I've got family that have over the years used that as a way to become a democratic homeowner and follow their dream. It can be a hiding depending on the additional costs, but let's not get into the detail on that. But I just wanted to reiterate what Councillor Packman said, that can we make sure that we do wherever possible promote individual ownership and empowerment and find ways to give people a hand up rather than a hand out, because the market is I mean it's beyond description at the moment, and people have to this is a huge sector, and I think it's great the work you're doing, because the bleak outlook for young people never knowing how they're going to get a roof over their head, and that's the reality for a lot of people, is it has massive social implications because it causes mental health issues with the insecurity or the lack of vision and that. So everything we can do to give people the chance to put something of their own over their head, I think we need to be doing. So it's a shame First Homes is going, but as a scheme maybe something better will come through. But if we can keep looking into that, because it is important that we consider the next, not even the next generation, but the one coming after them, because otherwise their outlook is just horrendous.
Anybody else? Councillor Wing.
I suppose I just wanted to ask, I sit on planning, so it really annoys me when developers come back and reduce the social housing from 30 or 25. Just really annoys me because there's this viability test. Normally the land's been resold with outline planning permission, so then it becomes less viable to build, to actually offer the 30%. Are we at a situation where you feel from a housing perspective, not a planning perspective, that we've got enough of those of that percentage of housing coming from our planning applications that are being approved?
Well, the simple answer to that is no. You know, so I mean, if you look at the needs information, and this is not new, we've said it before, the needs information, probably around about half of all homes that are built in the district would need to be affordable in one form or another, whether that's for rent or for shared ownership or some other discounted home ownership product. And, you know, through planning, we're not getting to 30%. So the straight answer is no. There's lots of reasons for that. And obviously we are trying to push those numbers up by the council's own programme and building ourselves and buying properties that were not earmarked for affordable housing through planning. They were market units that we're buying and subsidising so they can be let at affordable rents. And I know that some housing associations are also taking on whole sites and building them out themselves for that very reason. So there are other ways that we can approach this that increase the numbers. But if you look, strictly speaking, at what comes through the Section 106 planning process, then no, the numbers are too small to meet need.
Okay, so couple of recommendations we're asked to look at. No, one recommendation, I do apologise. That the first time's interim policy statement is revoked with immediate effect. Do we have a proposer? Councillor Davis, and a seconder? Councillor Austin, and do we all agree? Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 9, the acquisition of 11 S106 homes at Fairlawn, Northwood Road. Calling Ashley again.
Thank you. The council's negotiated a deal to acquire 11 homes from SME developer Knights Lodge Properties on the Fairlawn site in Northwood Road, Broadstairs. Councillors may recall that originally Cabinet agreed in January 2025 that 7 homes on the site be purchased. A further 4 homes have become available through a change to the Section 106 agreement, which means that this acquisition has been reassessed to include 11 properties that are 4 one-bed flats, 4 two-bed houses and 3 three-bed houses. At a cost of 1.7 million, this represents a good deal as the open market value of these homes is 2.4 million. The council has been looking for some time at opportunities with this developer and has inspected some of the other sites in the developer's ownerships, which are all finished to a high quality specification. The structure of the proposed deal has been analysed by finance colleagues, and the theory input is included in the report for members to see in that the acquisition is viable. These homes will achieve an anticipated EPC B rating, which will go straight into the council's housing revenue account and will be managed by the council's TLS service, who are obviously aware of the acquisition given the council's holistic approach to such purchases.
Thanks, Ashley. As again, so we've done these a few times. Any questions for Ashley? We all happy? Okay, there's a couple of recommendations there. Obviously, one that we proceed to buy those 11 homes, and the second one is that we let those in accordance to the council's allocations policy. So we can have a proposal for those 2 recommendations. Councillor Austin and Councillor Green is a seconder. We all agree? Excellent, thank you. Moving on to, thanks Ashley, thank you. Moving on to item number 10, which is the cleansing service purchase of new vehicles. And I call on Matt, sitting patiently at the back there.
Thank you, Chair. This report proposes the purchase of 6 vehicles to be used on the cleansing service, 5 of which are replacements that are planned and funded as part of the Vehicle Replacement Programme, or VRP, and 1 of which is paid for through funding as part of the government's simpler recycling legislation. The vehicles that are part of the VRP are as follows: 2 refuse collection vehicles up to a gross vehicle weight of 12 tonnes, These vehicles are required to replace equivalent vehicles on the cleansing fleet which have reached the end of their reasonable working life and have such have become increasingly unreliable and costing more in maintenance. The current programme indicates the replacements would be a 7.5 tonne RCV for street cleansing and a 12 tonne RCV with a separate food pod for the collection service. However, upon review of the VRP by both operational and transport management, the recommendation has changed that the service would be best served by the purchase of 2 RCVs with a gross vehicle weight of 12 tonne without a food pod. This style of vehicle is different from the 2 vehicles originally specified. This change would provide 3 main benefits. Operationally, a larger vehicle for the street cleansing service would naturally provide greater capacity and efficiency for the service, as a greater payload would mean less time spent in transit to tipping locations. In terms of maintenance, these vehicles would be aligned with 4 similar vehicles procured in 2023, creating more resilience and consistency within the fleet. Moving away from the dual stream vehicles will mean less work in parts to potentially repair. Financially, it is expected that the recommended vehicles would cost around £140,000 each, in comparison to the 7.5 tonne RCV for street cleansing, which would cost approximately £165,000, and the 12 tonne RCV with the food pod, which would cost around £190,000. This saving of around £75,000 would be reallocated within the vehicle replacement programme for future purchases. The other vehicles in the currently in the VRP are 1 large mechanical sweeper up to 15 tonnes and 2 smaller mechanical sweepers up to 5 tonnes. To efficiently sweep the streets of Thanet on a regular basis, a form of mechanical sweeping is necessary. The VRP specifies 2 7.5 tonne sweeper vehicles to be procured, and some of you remember that this was agreed by Council on the 29th of February 2024. However, upon review with our new transport manager, those that you are paying attention, I have brought with me tonight, it was proposed and suggested that the new configuration would provide a better solution. The original report proposed the purchase of 2 mid-sized vehicles. What is now proposed is the purchase of one larger sweeper vehicle, which offers a greater payload with only a slightly larger footprint, and 2 smaller vehicles up to about 4 or 5 tonnes, which would allow access to roads that would be inaccessible to large vehicles. Key to this proposal will be to allocate work which suits the vehicle specification, i.e. the larger vehicles will sweep larger roads, as in the ones coming into the district, while the smaller ones will go around more residential areas. Informal market testing has indicated that the cost of these 3 vehicles would not exceed the £350,000 that was originally allocated for the 2 7.5 tonne sweepers. Finally, a specialist food waste vehicle, which will be paid for by funding. As part of the government's simpler recycling legislation, which has driven the recent agreed changes to recycling collections, we have been allocated £142,000 to help deliver these changes. £102,000 of this specifically for a vehicle. The service currently co-collects food on the same vehicles as recycling residual waste. This method has been seen to be inefficient and problematic in terms of vehicle maintenance. It is for these reasons and the fact that the new collections will not be collected by due purpose vehicles that a dedicated food waste vehicle has been identified to be the correct use for this funding. The vehicle type in question is widely used throughout the waste industry and is specifically designed for collecting food. For example, it has little or no internal mechanisms, rounded corners, and is made from material less liable to degrade. To help achieve TDC's target of being net zero by 2030, suitable electric vehicles were evaluated as potential replacements. However, a very small market for equivalent vehicles with insufficient range, which would also be significantly over the expected spend, has led to a recommendation to purchase these diesel vehicles. They will be fuelled by HVO instead of diesel, which reduces the tailpipe emissions significantly. This decision is in line with what was recommended in the Overview and Scrutiny Panel report regarding HVO fuel. And happy to take any questions that I will probably defer to Dan.
Thanks, Matt. Councillor Scobie.
What's the sort of rough life of these vehicles? You said in the report there's one that we've had for 10, 11 years. Are we expecting similar life cycle out of these new vehicles?
They differ. Again, I'm going to have to defer this to Dan. The RCVs, the sort of large collection vehicles, we usually aim to have them for about 7 years. So getting 10 to 12 years out of them is a bonus. Although it is a bit of a loss leader because the maintenance starts going higher and higher the longer we keep them. The sweeping vehicles, then they 5 years?
6.
6. So around 6 years for the sweeping vehicles, because obviously they've got far more mechanical bits in them moving every single time they're out on the road.
Because, Chair, I ask it just because I'm supportive of the changes, make absolute sense, but obviously with local government reorganisation, we have to start asking the questions of, is it the right move for us to spend large amounts of money on kit that may not tie in with other local authorities that this service may get merged into? So there's external funding for this one, so it probably makes sense, but if we're talking stuff that's got a longer life than 2 years, any future investments and things we probably need to start thinking about while doing our research. Well, actually, let me ask a question because I'm making an assumption. When you chose this machinery, did you look at what other councils in Kent have got and how in local government reorganisation they might be merged together? I'm assuming not, but I'll ask the question.
No, we haven't. And I don't know if Matt might want to join in here in terms of the long-term financial plan of it. The 5 out of these 6 vehicles have been, the funding's been allocated for a long time for them, and the fact is that to provide the service now and for the next 3 years, and in some way, shape or form after that, even after the reforms, we need to get these vehicles. And to be fair, as I mentioned, the sweeping vehicles in particular, we agreed to purchase them in February last year, and it is only through a bit of re-evaluation, if you like, that we haven't got them already. I think the decision not to go with the other decision, if that makes sense, is the correct one and provide a better service for us. But I think, kind of in answer to your question, we need these vehicles now.
Okay, thank you very much. As I said, I'm supportive of it, Chair, but just wanted to... Well, I think on pretty much every one of these big decisions going forward, we should be, as a panel, questioning local government reorganisation, how that changes that. But thank you for your answers.
Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. And again, good project, Matt, because it ties in. As you know, I'm a big fan of the vegetable oil usage. Veggie vans is the way ahead, I think. I just wanted to highlight the fact that, again, there's no premium on this because these are standard ICE or type internal combustion engines rather than electric. So they would have, even if they were redundant in a shorter time frame from our point of view, I presume they'd have a good residual value on the open market were we to need to divest them in order to merge with someone else, and probably a better residual value than the equivalent electric. So, yeah, I think it's a good thing.
Councillor Bing.
I think waste and recycling is one of the things that won't change on reorganisation. People are still going to have bins that are full of stuff that need collecting either weekly or fortnightly, and I can't envisage that even in one of these very large unitary authorities that we are going to see waste bins coming from Maidstone or even Canterbury to empty our bins. I just think that that the likelihood is that we're still going to have local depots in a bigger area, because it doesn't make economic sense in terms of your fuel to be making people come all the way from wherever to empty our bins, which happens so frequently. You know, it's not going to stop. Rubbish will still exist when the large unitary authority comes. So I don't see purchasing these vehicles as a particular problem. I know they might not be compatible with other areas, but I don't think there's a big choice of vehicles, is there, out there? It's not like you want to go and buy an electric car or you want to go and buy a car or a van. There's a huge choice, but I would imagine there's not that many suppliers of waste vehicles in this country. There's not a big type, you know, there's not a huge difference or variety of waste vehicles for sale, I would imagine. They all seem to be called Dennis, I think.
In answer to your first question about the need for bins to be picked up, from a personal point of view, I certainly hope so. And in terms of the vehicles we're proposing to purchase here, they're not massively left field choices. They're sweeping vehicles that every local authority should have, and they're collection vehicles. We're actually simplifying things. We're moving away from vehicles that collect two different types of material to a standard one that's more can be chopped and changed between different services. So yes, I don't think these are massively flamboyant purchases.
Councillor Austin?
Picking up on that, presumably one of the many complications that we're going to face with local government reorganisation is that, as Matt pointed out earlier, most services, waste services across Kent are outsourced, aren't they? So do we know if there are any neighbouring councils near us where they employ their own cleansing staff?
No, as far as I'm aware, they're all outsourced. Canterbury has a bit of a hybrid of the two, but locally I think we're the only one that's in-house.
Councillor Scobie.
Well, Chair, and just to come back, I think that exchange, it sort of typifies exactly why, maybe not on this instance, but in the future we do need to be looking at this stuff, because there will be we all know there's going to be huge costs incurred with us moving to a different unitary authority, but the government is saying that the savings from that are going to massively overshow that in future years. That's what they're saying. Over 5 or 6 years there'll be lots of savings that can come from that. But decisions like this that we have control over, maybe not this one in particular, but similar ones coming up, can contribute to that. Because if we made a decision in exactly that point of where we have our services in-house and we go and buy lots of equipment, and then the new authority decides to do something different, that's taxpayers' money that's wasted. And similarly, a new authority may be able to have a better purchase power and be able to get a fleet in a different way, or borrow the money to spend on it. So it's not as simple as, oh yes, we're going to be collecting waste, so it's going to be the same, and we're going to have depots in each area. I accept that point, but it's not just as simple as that. There's a lot more going on, and I think that point exactly there shows why we need to be thoughtful of this. So maybe not on this one, but for every decision I think we should be challenging that, because this is going to be complicated, and anything that we can point out that might potentially save money or encourage people to think again, then good.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Chair.
I mean, I think as 3 years out, I think maybe that's fine, but yeah, as we get 2 and 1 years, I think then we're going to be more mindful. Matt?
Yeah, so in the context of LGR, we are doing exactly that. Obviously, like I said earlier, the government has actually sent out early indications as to when they are expecting us to sort of make decisions in that way. 26-27, from my perspective, is a business as usual year. 27-28 will be when we start looking at longer term decisions. I mean, even now, if we were looking at a contract that we could effectively extend for 2 years that took us up to LGR, we would consider whether an extension of a contract would be better arrangement than, you know, going out to the market for a long-term contract, for example. But it is, and always has been, business as usual until it's not. As part of the budget setting process this time round, we will be looking at the capital programme, for example, where these major spends sit, in terms of whether or not we're getting what is the capital programme reflective of where we think we're going to be in a few years' time. So previously the capital programme had some holding figures in, for example, in terms of investment. We would look at those and say, is now the time to invest, specifically around things like investment in Manston as a depot, for example. I think the statement around vehicles is we do need vehicles from a replacement perspective regardless. I think even if we didn't purchase the vehicles and went into LGR, there would need to be an arrangement in place for probably 3 years. None of the Kent authorities are even with the same provider. So when you look across Kent in terms of consolidating, and some of those authorities are out to the market now for 7-year contracts. So I think across Kent, you know, waste is a prime example. I think there is stability in waste because of the time it would take to review that. I do think there'll be hubs in individual areas because the wear and tear on vehicles from coming from a central location to each of the what are current districts is just not manageable. There is no vehicle that can sustain that level of mileage, and there is no efficient round that could be generated as a result of a central location. So I think looking at the vehicles and the types of vehicles and consolidating collections across the new unitary, 100%, I think that's probably 3 years in the making. So.
Anybody else? Just a quick one from me, Matt. More operational side of it. So probably one of the top 10 moans I hear about is the gutters not being swept. So it's great news that we're going to get to 2 new vehicles. So will there be a rota? 3 vehicles. Will there be a rota? So we know that Birchington will get done this month and Ramsgate on board. So we get an even usage out of those vehicles, or will it be a reactive thing where we demand those vehicles come to our areas?
It will be the former. It'll be... one of the reasons why we didn't do this in the first place is because I think previously vehicles were purchased and they weren't used in the right place. So smaller vehicles were getting used on larger roads, which they weren't really suitable for. As such, they fell apart rather quickly. But yeah, so A, for service provision, I want people to know when the vehicle is going to be there, and B, the idea will be that the roads that they're chosen to work on will be suitable for that vehicle. So yes, there will be a rota.
Thanks. Are we all done? Okay, so there are a few recommendations which are in the report there. So do I have a proposal for those recommendations? Councillor Austin, and a seconder? Councillor Curry, and we all agree? Excellent, thank you. Moving on to item number 11, which is the Manston Road Depot Environmental Compliance Works. And Matthew again.
Thank you, Chair. And before I start, I would just like to point out I'm not the author of this. I'm doing it on Mike's behalf. I have a knowledge of what's going on, so when you ask questions, if I look a bit vague, even more vague than normal, that's the reason behind it. This report sets out 2 recommendations that will be made in a report to Cabinet on the 28th of August in relation to the Manston Road Depot. The recommendations are for the reallocation of £957,000 of capital budget and the approval of a key decision to award a contract with a value in excess of £250,000. The depot at Manston Road is the operational base for the Council's cleansing service and vehicle fleet. Part of the depot is designated as a household, commercial and industrial waste transfer station and is the subject of a waste management permit that is administered by the Environment Agency. The permit sets out the parameters for the handling of waste at the depot and requires that waste be stored by material type in areas with an impermeable surface with sealed drainage. Waste is currently segregated and stored in the correct skip containers, but the standard of surface on which the skips are stored and the condition of the drainage apparatus has deteriorated over time. The storage provision therefore needs to be improved to meet the strict requirements of the site permit. A £1.32 million budget was approved as part of the 2023-24 capital programme for a project to improve infrastructure at Manston Road Depot, including the waste storage infrastructure. This sum was based on an early estimate of works costs in 2022. Since then, the scope has been broadened to incorporate other compliance work as described in section 3.6 of the report. These include new staff welfare facilities, work to existing drainage and road surfaces, health and safety related compliance works within the depot workshop and office buildings, and depot workshop and office building compliance works. The report provides more detail, including costs incurred to date and the forecast further cost of other works. Table 1 in section 3 of the report also provides a breakdown of all costs and shows how the budget shortfall will be derived. The total cost of the depot environmental compliance project has been estimated at £1.761 million. The report describes a budget gap of £957,000 that exists in relation to the described projects and purposes that the funding be reallocated from the vehicle replacement programme. The project cannot be delivered without this funding reallocation. Without the delivery of this project, there is a high risk of environmental action by the Environment Agency. This would impact on statutory service provision by the Council. Importantly, the proposed reallocation of funding will not impact on the delivery of the vehicle replacement programme, and the report provides some high-level information on the VRP budget for this year. A scheme has now been designed to RIBA Stage 3, and a tender process is anticipated to be completed by the end of October, with work starting at the end of the year. In addition to the funding reallocation, the report also seeks approval to commit funds to the works, which will exceed the £250,000 key decision threshold. I'll be happy to respond to any questions from the panel on the content of this report. Well, that's what it says there anyway. I'll do my best.
Okay, nothing too difficult, please. Councillor Curry.
Well, the good news is, Matt, your job's safe. Looks like we'll be keeping the Manston Road depot for a few years anyway.
Councillor Wing.
Yeah, I mean, we've got to spend this money. I mean, we've got to make sure that our staff have got decent facilities to work in, particularly our staff, our waste staff, because as you said, on days when we won't go out without a sou'wester and wellies, they're doing 20 miles a day, I think some of the guys are doing when they collect on their waste rounds. So I think it's really important that we do all we can to make sure our staff have the best facilities possible, even if we may not be here in 4 years' time. So yeah, I welcome this spend of money. Maybe it's been long overdue.
Councillor Austin.
I think just adding to that, I used to visit Manston Road quite regularly several years ago, and it was a bit ropey then. So in view of the fact that we've just highlighted issues around the health of cleansing staff, it's particularly important that we provide them with decent welfare facilities, so I'm all for this.
I think it should be said as well that the gap that's now appeared in what was our original budget, a lot of that is due to work in terms of the provision for staff that has already taken place. So obviously it's like shifting around money. The expert, of course, is sat there. But yes, I totally agree. From the time that I started a couple of years ago to where we are now, it's almost night and day in terms of provision for the staff there. So yeah, it's a good thing.
Anybody else? No. Okay, so we're asked to endorse the recommendations that Matt laid out, and they're in the report. And do I have a proposer for those? Councillor Austin, and a second to Councillor Wing. And we all agree? Excellent, thank you. Item number, thanks Matt. Item number 12, the forward plan and exec cabinet reports list. So if there's anything from that plan that the panel will wish to consider, then members are asked to note that report. Well done. So that concludes business for tonight's meeting. I declare this meeting closed at 9:04. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody over that side.